our regular session of Tuesday, June 6th. And the first order of business that we have is the opening prayer and the pledges of allegiance to the flags of the United States and the state of Texas. Councilmember Davis will lead us in the opening prayer. If you'll join me in standing, please.
Heavenly Father, as we strive to serve you, we ask that you provide your wisdom and guidance to us as we work to serve our community. From time to time, we have major concerns across our earth, across our community. So we ask that you give your blessings and keep our first responders safe as they go out and serve the community. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. All right, next item that we have on the agenda this evening, we have city events and announcements. We'll start with announcements of upcoming city events. Mr. James, you have the duty this evening?
I do. Just a reminder, tomorrow night we have the first of three budget community meetings. That's at 6:30 at the North Community Center. We have the second of those on Thursday night at 6:30. That's at Corbett Middle School. Also, just so folks know, the JBSA Randolph Air Force Base Task Force meeting is meeting down at ACOG on Thursday morning this week as well. Again, we had a community meeting last week on the area south of Randolph, and so we'll be broaching some of those issues with that committee as we move forward. Thursday is also the Northeast Partnership meeting at 11:30 at Olympia Hills Golf Course and Conference Center. And in case you need to pick up something to eat before you go to the community budget meeting Thursday, you can swing by the library, as the Chick-fil-A food truck will be there out in the parking lot, and they'll be giving a portion of donating a portion of proceeds to the library. Tuesday, June 13th, ACOG, CPS Energy, Denton Navarro, Rocha Bernal, etc. are partnering to host a one-day elected officials workshop. The Texas Open Meetings Act presented this workshop qualifies for certification under state law. Lunch is provided via CPS. The event is free, but you must be registered, so contact the city secretary's office. And again, that's all day on Tuesday the 13th. Also, Tuesday the 13th at 11:30, there is a transportation seminar entitled Planes and Trains from 11:30 to 1 at the Pearl Stable. Leadership from Union Pacific and SA Airport will be there giving an overview of kind of regional transportation issues. Again, you can contact the city secretary's office if you wish to attend. We have council that night. Thursday, June 15, we have the final of the three community budget meetings. That's at Schertz United Methodist Church. Tuesday, June 20th is the chamber luncheon. Saturday, June 24th, the library is again this year doing their tee-off for the library. That's just going to be at Saturday. Kicks off at 10 a.m. And so you can play putt-putt golf in the library on the 24th. The Chamber is also having their home living showcase from 10 to 2 at the Civic Center. Council meeting on the 27th. And then Friday, June 30th, TML is having their legislative wrap-up from 7:45 to 2:30. That's in Austin, so contact Brenda if you're interested.
Thank you, Mr. James. Next up, we have announcements and recognitions by the city manager, Mr. Kessel. Mr. Kessel?
Mayor, Council, I wanted to recognize our Development Services Department for a unusual outreach to our community that they did at the end of May. Emily Grobe, Channery Gold, and Gil Durant, among others, went over to Pascal Elementary School, and they did a presentation in the cafetorium with all the kids there on building safety, and they did a neat job of kind of showing them the building site plan and plat and talking about building safety in that context. But then they brought a bunch of construction material with them, and Gil, who's a pretty big guy, would hold up the pieces of construction material and get the audience to kind of shout out what it was. Pretty interactive. The kids really seemed to get involved and ask a lot of questions. A bit unique of an approach, to really show the school-age kids how important it is to know where fire exits are and to understand all the different aspects of building safety that they might need to know. So great job for Development Services for that creative idea. I think they're going to try and reach out to some of the other elementary schools, if I'm not mistaken, over the next year and continue that program.
Very good. Thank you, sir. All right, next up, we have some new employees to recognize this evening. We'll start with the Economic Development Department. Evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Mayor and council members, Mr. Kessel. Wanted to introduce Drew Vincent, who has joined our team as an economic development analyst. Drew will be the brains behind the economic development team. As we work on projects, we rely very heavily on our analysts to find any information that we need, whether it's a specific project that we're working on or as we look to explore into different industries and targets that we should focus on. We rely on our analysts to do that. Drew recently completed his master's. He received a master's in public administration from the University of Kansas. So he's coming from outside of the state, although he does have Texas roots, as he spent some time in Baylor at a program there, and then actually worked for the Waco downtown economic development group there. So he comes with a lot of educational background, but then also having some real-world experience there in Waco in economic development. So we're excited to have him, and we're now fully staffed and excited to move forward.
Very good. Well, Drew, we will offer you the microphone. It's not required, but for every new hire, we give you an opportunity to say anything if you wish.
Sure. The only thing I would like to say is I'm very appreciative to be here. I'm very passionate about local government, so Schertz is a great place to be. So thank you for the opportunity to work with y'all. So that's about it.
Very good. Very glad to have you with us, and hope you're with us for a long time.
Thank you very much.
Next up, engineering. Easy, Ms. Woodley.
Beginning to think this time would never come. I would get to introduce someone new to all of you. Council, Mayor, Mr. Kessel. I'm here to introduce John Nowak, our new licensed professional engineer. So economic development got a brain, engineering got a brain too. So I'll go over a little bit of John's history. He was born in Flint, Michigan, but grew up in Sheridan, Wyoming. So we have, we're really getting a national perspective around here in Schertz. Graduated with a degree in civil engineering from the University of Wyoming. He worked first for the city of Billings, Montana, then moved back to Sheridan, Wyoming, and most recently worked for about 9 years as the public works director for the city of Bulverde. So he's been around Texas for a while. Now Bulverde being even smaller than Schertz, John was afforded the opportunity to wear many hats over there. So he did, some of everything similar to what we do over here. And during his career of 24 plus years, he's done construction inspection, construction itself, project design, review of all sorts of plans and entitlement projects. Let's see, he has been active with the American Public Works Association, including some local and national level leadership positions with the Rocky Mountain chapter, which includes Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, and the South Central Texas branch. He also served on the Montana Public Works Standard Specifications Committee, working to come up with standards and specs that were used throughout the entire state of Montana. Since he's been here in Texas, he hasn't already established an ongoing relationship with folks from TxDOT, the MPO, Bexar County, so that should make his transition to Schertz here pretty good. He's got excellent experience directly applicable to some of the work that we're doing right now. He's here just in time to team up with Cecilia and use the PCI study that we recently did, and he'll be managing the roadway rehabilitation project that we'll be kicking off shortly. Interesting fact, really fun fact, he serves as a part-time deputy constable for Comal County. So he really knows parts of our city extra well from a very different perspective than what we see daily. He enjoys working on cars and going to car shows. I asked him about the car that he's been driving to work, and I learned that he and his wife Donna got married in that car in a drive-through chapel in Vegas right after they bought that 2001 Corvette 17 years ago. So I thought that was a super fun story. I hope he doesn't mind me sharing it so publicly. But John and Donna live with their dog and 2 cats, and we are really looking forward to working closely with him and having him help us out here.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, John. And as always, I said opportunity at the microphone, but it's not mandatory.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm very happy to be here, very excited to be here, and I look forward to working with all of you as well as the rest of the staff to put whatever knowledge and talents I have to good use in achieving your goals and objectives.
Wonderful. Welcome, and hope you'll be with us for quite some time. Thanks for joining us. All right, Public Works.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, Mr. Kessel. Tonight I'd like to introduce you to a new employee in our Public Works Division. He started in our Water and Wastewater Division as a Serviceman 1. His name is Zachary Ura. Zach started April 3rd of this year. He was born in San Antonio. He grew up here in Schertz. Graduated from Allison Steele High School in 2011. His hobbies include fishing, reptiles, and Xbox. Before starting his work here with the city of Schertz, he worked as a ranch hand in Tilden, Texas.
Very cool. Well, Zach, welcome. And again, chance at the microphone, but not mandatory.
I appreciate being here, y'all, and hope y'all are having a good night.
Excellent. Welcome. Glad to have you with us. All right, that's all the new employees that we've added over the last several weeks. Next item we have on the agenda is the hearing of residents, and we just have one signed up this evening. Mr. Zeus.
Zeus, 528 Waywood Pass, Schertz. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. This evening, I was very, very reluctant. Up to two hours ago or so, I've had many, many calls from some city employees, from some county officials, and 2 news media outlets regarding several issues that's taking place in our city. I ran into, I'll skip that for a second, one of the school board members and at HEB. And he asked me if I still go by City Hall. I said, not exactly. He said, well, stay away from there. There's a firing squad. I know what he meant, whether he said it sarcastically or he meant well. I said, it is what it is, sir. And I'm sure you all know we lost a lot of employees that was terminated, some of them on a length of service. I had 2 calls from 2 news media outlets regarding hidden cameras in our vent system, air vent system. It's really disturbing. You know, this is the city that we all love. This is taking place under your watch. Under your watch. And if you cannot protect this city and its employees, you really shouldn't be up there. I feel sad for them. I feel terrible. But you don't want to know what one of the news media outlets told me about city council. They do not want to talk to them. But you don't want to know the word they used, because it was disturbing. But I'm asking you, your job, you took an oath to protect the city and protect its employees. Sirs, ma'am, I'm asking you, if you can't, step down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zeus. All right, next thing we have on the agenda this evening, we've got a number of workshops. We've had a request from staff that the quarterly finance report be postponed for a week, so we'll do that. We do have a guest here with us this evening, so we'll start out on item number 4 under workshops, update and discussion on the city's pension plan, current assets, liabilities, and its current standing. So, Mr. James, this one for you.
Now, this one's not for me at all, so you're fortunate for that. Just a few opening words, if you will. One thing that you received in your packets is a summary that James pulled together, providing an overview of the city's pension plan that we have with Texas Municipal Retirement System. Again, I know that was asked for some weeks ago. I think James ran into a series of never-ending edits, but the credit is really to him. He sort of surprised us, do one, we'd say, oh, well, this would be interesting. Go figure this out. So we kind of kept adding and adding and adding. So that was not due to the lack of his effort. But I will tell you that this is a very, very important topic to everyone in our community. Certainly for our residents, it's very important as they read about pension issues in other communities around the state and wonder what position the city is in. It's obviously a concern for City Council, given the fact of your responsibilities to look at that and make sure our dollars are being spent well. And then this is also one that's very important to city staff, because this is our pension program as well, and so staff watches very closely these sorts of things, if you will. What you'll find out, and we have a representative from TMRS here, is we effectively participate in the state's local government pension program, which is the Texas Municipal Retirement System, and that has a couple of key benefits for us. One is, and you read this in James's report, and you may hear about this tonight, is it takes some of that oversight and decision-making out of the hands of local folks. And I say some of that, which is good, because where you saw in the report and where you've seen in the media, cities have run into problems, is very often they make short-term decisions. They effectively kick the can down the road. They either agree to benefits that they really can't fund over the long haul. They make overly optimistic objectives as to returns on investments going forward. Or frankly, when times get tough, they say, well, we'll catch up next year. We'll catch up the year after that. And that tends to be where they run into problems. So relying on TMRS, one thing it does is it sort of keeps us honest, if you will, and make sure you've got this outside agency to sort of say, this is really what you need to be doing to make sure you're solvent, to make sure you can fund this going forward and have a plan for it. The other benefit to us is because this is really that large system, and frankly, most of our benchmark cities are members of TMRS, and as James explained how the system works, it becomes a tool we use to attract folks from other communities in Texas. There are a lot of staff that we benchmark from other cities, New Braunfels, San Antonio, et cetera, and when they look to possibly make a career move to come to City of Schertz, a big question they have on their mind is, will my TMRS time transfer? And that's an advantage we have that, frankly, other communities don't if they've chosen to opt out. So if we look at the pool of qualified, educated folks that we're trying to bring in with experience, we want to make sure that we can be able to accommodate those years of service they have in the system. So with that, I will kick it over to James to do an introduction.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Evening, Mr.
Tonight,
Walters.
I get to introduce to you Mr. Anthony Mills from TMRS. He is the Senior Regional Manager for our area, and he has brought a PowerPoint and some other reading materials that I passed out to you before Council started. So with that, I'll invite him up to go ahead and give you his presentation, and then I'll make some closing remarks afterward, and we'll open up for questions.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Mr. Mills, please. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for having me here this evening. And before I begin, I'd just like to point out to you that I reviewed the memo that your finance director prepared for you this evening. And I just have to say it is as about a thorough a memo that I've ever seen prepared for a council. And I know that a lot of what you have questions about inside that memo, you will find answers. But this evening, what I'd like to do is to give you a high-level overview of the program and then drill down as specifically as you would like for any of the questions that you have about your TMRS plan. One of the things that I'd like to reiterate to you, As stewards for this community, I think it is commendable to see that you want to know what's going on with your pension plan, what the status of that plan is. Very often, when you pick up the newspapers these days, you hear about pension plans and some of the ailments that are facing those pension plans, including right here in the state of Texas. And it is certainly, in being good stewards, you'd want to know how your plan matches up, what's going on with your plan. And this evening, I think that we'll be able to address some of the questions that you have. There we go. All right, fantastic. So with that, I did prepare a short PowerPoint presentation. I'll just use it as a guide, and we'll go into the detail that you all would really like for us to discuss here this evening. When you hear about some of the problems facing pension plans, not just around the country, but right here in Texas, some of what you're hearing these days is that benefits, they're not sustainable. You're hearing that the required contributions are not being made. You're hearing that unrealistic expectations are being placed on these pension plans and that they understate the pension costs. And of course, that can lead to some long-term problems. And I need to just point out that what your executive director pointed out to you earlier, controversies over state versus local control and local governance, these are some of the issues that you hear about that are facing pension plans around the country. I'd like to point out to you why TMRS is different in just about every regard to many of these indicators that show you the health of a pension plan. TMRS, we've got 875 cities that participate in our program. All 875 voluntarily came into the system. But let me point out to you that each of the systems in TMRS, each of the systems has its own local control in that you design the plan that is appropriate for your community. It is not designed from the state and then sent to the city. Yes, the state, inside our state statute, there are options for the city to choose from, but you've designed this plan, and it is still local control today, and it will be tomorrow for the next council and the next to decide what is appropriate for the city of Schertz. When we look at our membership, we have over 107,000 active employees that participate in TMRS, and of those 107,000, as of last month, 325 of those employees were from right here in the city of Schertz. Your full-time employees who work more than 1,000 hours a year, they participate in the system. It's mandatory for them to participate. We have over 56,000 annuitants. That is those folks who have retired from the system and are drawing a benefit from the system. Of those 56-some thousand retirees, we have 94 of them who have retired from the city of Schertz. We are governed, TMRS is, by a 6-member board of trustees. Those board members have been appointed by the governor and approved by the Senate. The participating cities, we run the range. Texas is a dynamic state. TMRS is a dynamic system meeting the needs of those dynamic cities, towns, and villages throughout the state. We have several cities in our program that have fewer than 2 employees. 15 of them actually have just 1 employee. And our largest city is your neighbor, the city of San Antonio, with over 6,000 active employees that participate in the system. A suburb of Schertz, yes, I got that. I saw the sign coming in.
Yes, indeed.
TMRS, when you look at the Internal Revenue Code, generally you're going to hear retirement plans like ours be referred to as either a defined contribution plan or defined benefit plan. TMRS, we don't fit neatly into either category. When you're talking about a defined contribution plan, that is one like a 401k or 457 plan. Those type of retirement plans, the employee and possibly the employer pays into the retirement account. The employee generally will make the investment decisions, and then that account builds in value over the employee's career. And when he gets to retirement, whatever that balance is, that's what he's got to work with. Will it last a lifetime? Maybe, maybe not. Very often in a defined contribution plan, they do not last a lifetime. In a defined benefit plan, generally when you look at those, a pure defined benefit plan is going to be one like the teacher's retirement system here in Texas, the employee's retirement system, where in those systems, an employee works a career, certain salary is in place, we come up with an average salary for him in those type of systems, and then he will receive a percentage of that salary based on the number of years and a multiplier that's used to calculate the percentage that he's going to receive. Now, TMRS, as I said, we don't fit neatly into either of those categories. We are a hybrid cash balance plan. In TMRS, the member and the employer, the city, pays into the system during the employee's career. And in that regard, it looks more like a defined contribution plan because he's building balances that will ultimately be converted to a benefit. We look more like a defined benefit plan in that when the member finally gets to retirement, we're going to convert those cash balances to a lifetime stream of income. Now, what's different is that in TMRS, you are assured, not just the member, but the city as well, that by the time the member gets to retirement, the city will have set aside the appropriate dollars to pay that lifetime retirement benefit. And we'll dig down into that here in just a moment. TMRS, when you look at our investment return assumptions, 6.75%, that is our assumed rate of return. That is one of the lowest in the country. And in Texas, of all the major retirement systems, it is the most conservative of all the large statewide retirement systems. Back in 2007, about a decade ago, TMRS had very difficult conversations with our cities. Schertz was one of the cities that we spoke to a decade or so ago. And what we told you then, and I was one of the people to speak to the cities around the state, and I've still got tire tracks on my back to show that I was there to have these conversations. We said that we were making several substantive changes in our program, but that what it would do is it would stabilize the rates for our cities, and that it would ensure that all of the cities in TMRS would stay on the path to being fully funded, and the system itself would certainly be on better footing, solid footing, when we look out into the future. And I can say a decade later, with all of the negativity that you hear in the news about pension plans, TMRS is standing out as a model, partly because of the bitter pill that we swallowed a decade or so ago when we made several substantive changes. Those changes included closing the amortization schedule, being sure that we had an appropriate schedule where all of our cities would be fully funded. We changed up the actuarial funding methodology to ensure that all of our cities, for the liabilities that you have in your plan, not just today but in the future, that you would always advance fund those liabilities so that those liabilities doesn't get away from the city, from the employer. We did that. We also changed up the investment strategy that we had. At that time, we were an extremely conservative, and we're still a fairly conservative. I've already mentioned to you, we have one of the lowest investment return assumptions in the country, but we were even more conservative a decade or so ago. We were invested 100% in bonds, government and corporate bonds. We knew looking out into the future that had we stayed with that asset allocation, there would come a point where it was going to put upward pressure on our city's contribution rates. So we began that process of diversifying. We took a dollar cost averaging approach where over 5 years we rolled out about 1% of the trust fund every month for about 5 years into about 2013, where we began to move those funds into a more aggressive portfolio that included equities, both domestic and international stocks we moved into. Now, those are still passively managed stock funds that we're investing in. There are no individual stocks that TMRS invests in. But we knew that that was the appropriate steps to take. And let me just reiterate that what we said a decade or so ago was that this was going to put us on better footing. It was going to ensure that the plan was solid. It was going to ensure that the plan was solvent. It was going to ensure that all of our cities, each of the 875 cities, including Schertz, was on a path to be a fully funded plan. That when we look at the present value of the future benefits that this plan design has in place for the employees who work here, for the 300-some employees who currently work, and for the 94 who've already retired, you would be assured that you've got the appropriate assets on account with TMRS to meet those liabilities today and into the future. And we can say here tonight, June 6, 2017, that that's exactly where we are. Those changes that we made helped to reduce the volatility of our city's contribution rates. That's what we said would happen. That is exactly what has happened. And you can look back, and in the report that your finance director prepared for you, you'll find data in there that would show you and reiterate what I'm saying, that those rates have stayed steady. Now, when you look at TMRS, one of the things that I've already alluded to is that each of the cities in our program has got local control in the design of the plan. One of the things that I always like to make sure that a city council understands is that the plan design that you have in place was probably put in place before you were ever elected to the council. When you look forward into the future, you need to understand that there's nothing about your plan design and the provisions that are available to this council that would not be available to a future council. If you were to look into your crystal ball wondering what does the community of Schertz look like 10, 15, 20 years down the road, and you want to make sure that this is a plan that is sustainable, not just today in its current design, but a city council in the future would still have at its disposal, in its toolkits, among those options that are available under our statute, to put in place what is appropriate for Schertz, as it has been since you entered the system back in February of 1993. Each of the 875 cities in TMRS is funded as a separate entity, while TMRS and the overall trust fund itself takes the dollars that the employees pay in, those 107,000 employees, the 56,000 retirees are receiving benefits, not just from the dollars that the employees are paying in, but also the dollars that are coming from the cities in TMRS. But each of our cities has its own finances, its own individual valuation is conducted. We do a statewide valuation where we look at each of those 875 cities, and included in the packet that I brought to you this evening is the 2018 rate letter. The 2018 rate letter was just posted just last Friday, I believe it was, is when it was posted. That rate letter is the reconciliation that we conduct each year when the books close December 31st. December 31st, 2016, this shows you the data for the city of Schertz. It shows you exactly what the reconciliation looks like and how we arrived at your rate. It's included in your packet. I believe it's going to be the second set of documents that's in that packet on the right-hand side there. And inside it, you will find line item by line item all of the assumptions that were made and then the reconciliation of the actual plan experience that took place during the year 2016. And it will show you how we ultimately arrive at the city's rate for the upcoming year. Let me mention to you that that rate, we refer to it as the actuarially determined employer contribution rate. That is important, one of the most important indicators of the health of any retirement plan is whether or not the employer is paying that ADEC. If you're paying that contribution rate in TMRS, it ensures that you're on the path to fully fund your plan. Now in TMRS, it is important to understand that all of our cities have to pay the ADEC. All of our cities pay that contribution rate, each of the 875. There are no pension holidays. When you hear about plans that are sick, plans that have problems, very often you will find that the employer, for whatever reason, decided that they were not going to pay the actuarially required contribution rate. And when that happens, maybe it's because there's a good year with the investment returns and it outperformed what you had assumed. Or maybe you raised the benefits and now the money does not match up with what you've promised the workforce. In TMRS, it does not work that way. All of our cities pay that actuarially determined employer contribution rate, and all of our cities are on track to be fully funded. When we look at Schertz's plan, I will not go into detail on this particular slide, and just so that you know, my 50-year-old eyes don't read these slides very well, but I have included in your packet the actual document that matches up to what's on the screen. So in case you're wondering, you can see at a glance what Schertz's plan looks like, the plan design itself, and you'll see the employee deposit rate, the city's matching ratio, the vesting requirement, that is how long it takes an employee to work to actually become vested, where eventually he could qualify eventually for a retirement benefit. The eligibility requirement itself, 5 years of vesting, and age 60 is one way to qualify for retirement here at Schertz. The other way would be to get 20 years of service credit in, and then the employee at any age could qualify for retirement benefit. Now, something that I said at the outset when describing our plan, I called it a hybrid cash balance plan. Let me just point out something to you that it will help to illuminate what a cash balance plan actually does for an employee. You could have two employees who come to work for Schertz on the same day. The gentleman who went to work at your Public Works Department, had y'all hired two employees on the same day with the same salary, and let's just say that young man is 20 years old on the day he came in, and his counterpart who's hired on the same day is 40 years old, and they're going to do the same job. And let's just say, for example purposes, that they both work for 20 years, and they both have the same salary projection and trajectory. And when you get to the end of those 20 years, they both got the same cash balances in their retirement accounts. The city has set aside the same matching dollars for each of them. And what I've mentioned to you at the outset is that we're going to convert those cash balances to a lifetime retirement benefit. Now, in a cash balance plan like TMRS, what we're going to do is look at those cash balances. And now we're going to figure out how to divide them. So we have to look at the age of the retiree to figure out how to divide it. So 20 years out, that 20-year-old is now 40 years old. That 40-year-old is now 60 years old. So the 60-year-old, if they were to retire hypothetically on the same day, they're both eligible. If they were to retire on the same day, the 40-year-old is not going to get as much as the 60-year-old. And that has to do with mortality. The mortality tables that we use tell us the annuity purchase rate. That's the divisor that we use to come up with the payment amounts for that member. But what the city has done along the way with the contribution rate that you've paid in You've paid in the appropriate matching dollars. You've been advance funding that member's COLA benefit. You've been paying for the base retirement benefit. That's all part of the rate that you pay into TMRS. So that rate letter that you see in your packet, that is important, and it shows you what that rate is going to be for the upcoming year starting January 2018, as it has been every year since you came in back in 1993. We provide, after the valuation, what your rate will be for the upcoming year. And let me continue to reiterate along the way, that rate is the rate to ensure that you're still on pace to become 100% funded by the end of your amortization schedule. We have included for you in this packet, and I just also included last year's rate letter since we are still here in 2017. Let me just point out that some of the data, you got the most up-to-date data in the report, the memo that Mr. Walters prepared for you. And as I said, it is one of the most thorough memos I've ever seen prepared for a council before. But I did include this current year's rate letter, just a snapshot of it, so that you could see what it is currently and what it will be for the upcoming year. I included the full rate letter for 2018. Some of the data that I've included, I had already run before we had the rate letters available to us last week. So I will point out where there are differences, just in case you're wondering. When we look at the plan at a snapshot, at the financials, you can see this is showing you some of the data that you're going to find in the memo that was prepared for you. When you look at the plan provisions and the contribution rates itself, looking at your plan design, looking at the demographics of your workforce, we have the rate for this current year is at 16%. For 2018 is going to be 16.14% for the upcoming year. One of the things that you'll notice on this page is the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, that $15.7 million. Now, what you don't see on the other side of that, or what you don't see in the whole story, is that we're looking at the total liabilities in your plan. That includes all of the currently active employees who are paying into the system, and inside your rate letters you'll find what that line item liability looks like. We're looking at the non-contributing employees. You have some employees who have come to work here at Schertz before. They quit, and they've either gone to work for another TMRS city, or say they quit and they were vested in the system, where they're eventually going to qualify for a retirement benefit as long as they don't refund and forfeit that benefit. They qualify at age 60. Those employees, that liability, we still have it line itemed as well. And then you've also got those employees who have retired. Some employees who had retired before we made some of the changes we did beginning back in 2008, some of the COLA benefits, because you have it on a repeating ordinance, we anticipate those COLAs to be ongoing. Some of those COLAs had not been fully funded, so we're including in your rate for the city to not only catch up for those that had not been fully funded, but to also advance fund the COLAs for those employees who come into work today. For the employees who you were introduced to earlier here this evening, the rate that you pay in what we call your normal cost will already include not just their base retirement benefit, but also any future COLAs that they're going to have. Before 2008, TMRS did not advance fund all of the repeating COLAs, in full disclosure. That was one of the screws that we tightened. That was one of the bitter pills that our cities swallowed at that time, but we said that what that would do going forward was it would make sure that our cities' liabilities would not continue to grow and get away from them. It would not be deferring down the road to the next generation to pay for the cost of COLAs for the current generation. So that's all included in the rate that you're looking at. But the liability, that $15.7 million, you've got your active employees, you've got those non-contributing employees who once upon a time worked here and had built a liability but no longer work here, and you've got those folks who have actually retired. When we look at your total liabilities in your plan, that is a bit over $60 million, $60.2 million. And what you don't see here is that the assets, since 1993 of the city paying into TMRS, you have assets on the books. Your actuarial accrued assets is a bit over $44 million. The difference between those two is the unfunded. And the amortization schedule is the 25-year schedule that you've got to fully fund the unfunded portion of your liability. Let me say it again, if you don't leave with anything else that I say today, what TMRS has that undergirds our program, that distinguishes from those plans that have health issues, is that all of our cities, with an unfunded actuarial accrued liability, will fully fund those liabilities. All of our cities will be 100% funded. Included in your memo, I noticed that you have a rundown of some of the cities in TMRS that are already more than 100% funded. Those are typically going to be smaller cities. Maybe some cities who have been in the system for a long time have never made any plan change, design changes. That has not been the case with Schertz. When we look back historically at the city, it looks as though the city took very deliberate, well thought out before making any plan design changes. But in those plan design changes, what TMRS has always done is to be sure that those liabilities are put there and that now our cities are advance funding the cost of those changes to your plan design. When you look at your funded ratio, that's going to be the difference between the assets and the liabilities. Right now, you are about 71% funded, and we do have more up-to-date data on that, and it is included in your rate letter. That funded ratio is now 73.2%. I included in your packet a projection, but this was all based on last year's valuation. It's more up-to-date now, and I'll have better numbers in a couple weeks. But for last year's valuation, I included the next to last page that's in your packet is the projection that shows you where we anticipate the rate to be, and that is fairly stable for the next 7 years or so. And then when you see the funded ratio, we continue to project that to continue to move toward 100%. And that's the trajectory that you want for both your rate and for your funded ratio as your assets continue to close the gap on the unfunded actuarial accrued liabilities. And that's what we do not just for Schertz, but for each of the 875 cities in TMRS. And with that, Mr. Mayor, Council, I will open it up for any more specific questions that you'd like to detail.
So first I'll let Mr. Walters close us out, as he said that he'd like to, and then we'll open it up for council.
All right, so first off, I'd like to thank Mr. Anthony Mills for coming down and talking to us. We gave him a few weeks' notice, and he drove down from Austin and fought all that traffic to get here. I would like to point out in my research, pension funds are a common retirement plan for local and state governments here in the state of Texas. 96% of municipalities in Texas are actually belong to TMRS if they're over 5,000. And even the cities that don't participate in TMRS often have a pension fund of their own in some form or fashion. This is a very common practice, and as you see in our not only neighboring cities but our benchmark cities, they have retirement plans very, very similar to ours, if not exactly the same. So while it won't necessarily be an attractor to the city if we get personnel from those entities, if we don't have a comparable plan, it will be a detractor instead. With that, if there's any questions, then Anthony and I will try to tag team those for you.
All right, well, Dr. Kaiser and Mr. Larson, I think you guys had asked for this to be on first, so I'll open it up. Dr. Kaiser, if you like.
Just a couple of things. I think on slide 5, if you could go back, I was just wondering, has Schertz ever actually had to reduce benefits?
Not that I can see when I look historically, the plan changes that have taken place, I can't see that there's ever been a plan reduction.
Okay. And then, James, have projections been done beyond 2018 for how many employees we expect to see retired and what it will be costing the city? How far out have those projections been made?
We don't do that in-house. That is part of the actuarial calculation, if I'm not mistaken, that TMRS does to anticipate that and include it in the rate.
And we do. In part of the valuation, we look not just at how we expect the workforce to continue to grow. Here in a major metropolitan area, we would anticipate that to be about 3% per year, not just in head count, but also in salary itself. There can be enough experience that could be lowered. We saw that happen back during the 2008 economic downturn. Many of our cities saw that employees who we would have anticipated retiring as the economy slowed dramatically, those retirements did not happen. Right. And we held down what we projected until the economy picked up, and now we're starting to see that not only are those pent-up retirements happening, but they're starting to happen at a quickened pace.
Okay. And then just one more thing, and you may have said this in your presentation, so I apologize if you did. So when employees retire, they take an annuity. Can they take, similar to TRS, a lump sum and reduce the annuity, or is it just, what options do they have?
You're correct, Councilwoman. There are options in TMRS that would permit a member to reduce the monthly benefit that he and possibly a beneficiary would receive by taking a lump sum payment. I would like to distinguish one of the things that's been in the news about, say, the Dallas plan that's had so many problems. That deferred retirement option plan that they have is very different than what we have called the partial lump sum distribution. It's much more like the statewide teacher system, where they can take a partial lump sum, and in that partial lump sum, it's already been calculated. It is a revenue neutral option for TMRS. Whether a member takes a partial lump sum or not, it's actuarially equal, because we're going to reduce that annuity, the monthly benefit that he's going to draw, based on the amount of that lump sum and his age and his beneficiary's age, to reduce it to the point that it is a revenue neutral option.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Mr. Larson?
Thank you for coming to answer questions, and I apologize to everyone in advance. I have a lot. I will admit I am not a finance guy, so remember that in your answers. And I just want to preface this with I think I think it would be negligent for us to not at least review this in depth. So I really appreciate the presentation. And so one of the questions I have is when I look at the percentage of the net effective retirement contribution, that's the city's percentage of payroll based on the actuarial assumptions that we contribute each year. That's correct? Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And so I guess just to clarify, that means that even though our pension plan technically says it's a 2-to-1 match, ultimately, in reality, from a payroll, from an expense side, it's essentially a 4.25-to-1 match.
Well, not exactly. Not exactly. The rate that you're paying is an actuarially determined contribution rate. If you look at the rate letter itself, and let's just go to the 2018 rate letter, there's a reason that we break down the rate between the normal cost, the prior service cost, that's your total retirement rate, and then we also have the supplemental death benefit. That's the lump sum death benefit, that an employee who dies as an active employee here, we would pay 1 time his annual salary over and above any retirement benefit. A person who's retired from here, you also have those folks covered we would pay a $7,500 lump sum death benefit to a Schertz retiree's beneficiary when that person passes away. But the retirement rate itself, I want to go back to something that I mentioned to you earlier. The normal cost for the employee who just came to work, those three that you were introduced to here this evening, when we look at those employees' normal cost, for a 7-2-1 plan, it costs closer to 10.46%. That's the cost of the current service. Right? The prior service cost is some of the catch-up, and maybe I wasn't explicit enough about it. Let me go back and in full disclosure make sure that you understand. When we made those changes 10 years ago, the reason that we made those changes is that we had some cities in TMRS who were landlocked, and they weren't growing as rapidly as other cities had earlier in their history in TMRS. They were starting to get more retirees than they were active employees. And when that ratio narrows or even flips, then what you're looking at are increasing liabilities and a decreasing funded ratio. And that's not the trajectory you want. So what TMRS did was we changed the actuarial funding methodology so that all of our cities would advance fund liabilities today and future liabilities, including the cost of repeating COLAs. So you had some employees who had retired from Schertz. You've got 94 of them right now. You have a repeating COLA in place. So what TMRS is saying is that we anticipate that those folks, not just those, but of the 300 that we project to eventually retire, you had not set aside all of the dollars when some of them retired to fully fund a lifetime COLA for them, the same way that you had for the base retirement benefit, that normal cost. So part of your rate includes that prior service rate. That's the amortized portion of those previously unfunded benefits. So when we run out to the end of the amortization schedule, what will have happened when if you wanted to look into the future, I would be standing in front of a Schertz council. Actually, I won't be. I will be retired by then. And I would say, if I were here, that the past generation has fully funded all of the COLAs for the folks who are currently retired and all of the folks who will retire. And that Schertz rate now looks more like that 10.46%. So it's an actuarially determined rate. We have some cities where the ratio of actives to retirees is rather dramatic. Go to the city of Allen, and it is Frisco, either of them, and it's about a 10-to-1 ratio of actives to retirees. So their prior service rate looks very different than a Schertz. But let's go back to what I mentioned to you earlier. The undergirding ensures that all cities, regardless of the demographics, regardless of the plan design, all of our cities are on schedule to be fully funded, and it's that total rate that determines that you get there.
And you touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to clarify, what happens to beneficiaries if their city fails to meet its obligations? I know you mentioned that means you require the city to reduce their benefits, but how does that impact current employees and current beneficiaries? Are their benefits reduced, or is it only future state beneficiaries?
Any benefit that has already been accrued, they're already on the books. Those liabilities do not go away because the city may find itself having to change the plan design. So anybody who has worked here 20 years so far at a 2-to-1 match, if the city would, for some reason, whatever, heaven forbid, change that match, it does not change the match. It does not change that liability that's been accrued already. It would be from that point forward that that person would be affected. Those who had already retired, those benefits have already been annuitized. And let's go back to what I mentioned earlier. By the time a member gets to retirement, the city will have already set aside the appropriate dollars to annuitize that person's lifetime retirement benefit, the base annuity of it. And now you're catching up on the COLA as well.
And I guess a follow-up on that is, and this is, I understand it's a hypothetical, but I don't think it's an unrealistic one. Let's say a large member like the city of San Antonio runs into financial problems and they fail to meet their obligation for an extended period of time. What happens to those beneficiaries? How does that impact TMRS? Do they begin dipping into other funds to fund that? What does that look like?
Well, all of our cities, each of the cities, and let me just reiterate that second bullet point, that each of the city is funded as a separate entity, and the benefits are paid out as a separate entity. Now, we hold all the dollars in trust in one benefit accumulation fund, but Schertz dollars are not blended, and Schertz liabilities are not blended with San Antonio's liabilities. That would be San Antonio's issue alone, not Schertz's issue. And for a city that would run into financial difficulties in Texas, that has never happened in our 71-year history. But should a city find itself in a position that they would have to make those type of plan changes, one of the things that you would find is that for most of the cities in TMRS, if they had to make a plan design change that dramatic, most of those plans will be very close to fully funded already.
Okay, that's helpful, because one of the things that and this is from the private sector, the company I had pensions, but if you imagine a Detroit type scenario, maybe that doesn't impact other member cities, but how does that impact the beneficiaries? And I guess one of the questions is, are the employees who have enrolled in that retirement program protected from city leadership making poor decisions over an extended period of time, or is it a risk that the employees take on as being part of the TMRS program?
Well, one of the things that your executive director mentioned to you at the outset of this topic was that many of those decisions that could find a plan finding itself in a bad position has been taken out of the hands of local control. That is controlled by the system itself. Those type of the investment decisions, those are not local decisions. Those are system decisions. And as I mentioned to you, we have one of the most conservative assumptions in the state. The portfolio itself is a conservative portfolio. And there's no reason that I can see that has ever been discussed at TMRS that we would need to make any type of dramatic leap to change that philosophy.
And then when employees travel from TMRS city to TMRS city, who's ultimately responsible or liable for the retirement costs of that employee?
City to city, each city that would employ that person, that employee creates a liability at each of the cities, but it's independent to that city. You don't bring a liability to this city per se. Now let me just be real clear on one of the provisions that you have in your plan, and that is the updated service credit provision. We could be here for 3 hours talking about updated service credit, so I'll just say this about it. It has a feature called transfer provision. You could get an employee who comes to work here at Schertz who has worked at a different TMRS city where they did not have a plan that looks the same way, didn't have the same provisions that you have here at Schertz. Maybe they were at a small town that was a 5% deposit plan and a 1-to-1 match, or a 1.5-to-1 match. Well, if that employee works here long enough, then that employee would ultimately end up getting an additional cash credit that would be the liability of Schertz that would add to his benefit here. And that is just in full disclosure, city to city, how those liabilities are looked at.
And what happens if somebody passes away before exhausting their benefits? Do they go to, is it a family asset? Is it just go into the fund? What does that look like?
An employee in TMRS, as I mentioned to you, he pays in and then the employer also is paying in. The city is making the matching contributions. The matching dollars do not belong to the employee. The contributions that the employee makes and the interest that accrues on his contributions, those belong to the employee. They do not belong to the city. They don't belong to TMRS. We simply hold them in trust. And if an employee, no, not if, when the employee dies during retirement, because none of us get out of here alive, right? When that employee passes away, we will be sure that if he has not received back, he or his beneficiaries or his estate has not received back all of the contributions and interest that he had earned in his own personal account, by law, that has to be paid out to someone, to his beneficiary or to his estate.
Now, is that fund exhausted before you begin tapping into the matching funds?
Well, we start paying out matching dollars really from day one, but we count against the member's total balance. If you get an employee who retires from here, and let's say he's got $50,000 of actual money in his account when he retires, and a $100,000 matching account. He retires and he dies fairly early in his retirement, within a year or so. He has not yet exhausted the $50,000, but the annuity benefit that we had calculated for him, we used both his money and the city's matching dollars to calculate that benefit. But we're counting each of the monthly payments and the partial lump sum if he's taken one. We've counted all of that against his money that was held in trust. If there's any balance left in that account, it's got to be paid out by state law. And if you're wondering how long does it take to exhaust his balance, typically for the average TMRS retiree, it's going to be about 3.5 years.
Okay. And
the average retiree will draw benefit for about 22 years, though.
And do we know how TMRS hybrid benefit system would compare to a private 401k system for employees in terms of rate of return year over year when you factor in an equivalent matching program in the private system? So, like, you know, does that make sense?
I think I understand what you're asking. It's a very difficult comparison to do. There is no true apple-to-apple comparison. One of the things that you have to keep in mind, first off, let me just say at the outset, I've been in this industry for 24 years, and I've looked at both defined contributions. I've worked with defined contributions in my career, and I've worked with defined benefit plans. One of the things that you have to remember about a defined contribution plan like a 401k is that the original design was originally set up as a place for higher wage employees to defer additional dollars from taxes and to set aside for retirement. They were never intended to be the primary source of retirement income. They were meant to supplement a lifetime pension benefit that companies offered a generation or so ago. But as the market started to do what they did, as technology did what it did to the economy, many companies saw, and some employees actually asked for in the private sector, we'd like to do this on our own and build our own retirement. And companies said, we'll do that. We'll take this expense off our books, let you grow it, and then what you've got to work with at retirement is what you've got to work with. But what we're finding in our experience is we're now seeing the generation of those who retired with just a 401k. And regardless of the balance that has been built, invariably, most of those employees do not have a benefit that would last for a lifetime. And they do not compare favorably to a benefit like TMRS. And when you look at the administrative cost of administering a 401k plan versus a plan like TMRS, we're 0.2% of the cost. That's what it costs for TMRS to run the program. And for most of the 401k plans, they're more than double that amount in most cases.
Well, and I want to challenge that a little bit, because in a private 401k plan, you can, I've been saying this so you can correct me because I'm not a finance guy, so I apologize. Give me leeway here. But as I think about it, as a 401k plan, when my employer matches 5%, which is less lucrative than Schertz matches, that 5% becomes vested in 3 years, and if I die, that 5% still belongs to my family. And so are you factoring in the matching contributions that are forfeited into the cost of administering the TMRS system?
Okay, well, let me clarify. A member who dies, I thought that we were talking about members who pass away after they've retired. An employee here at Schertz who passes away, if he's vested, and it does take 5 years, not 3. I know you were comparing to, say, a private sector 401k. A member who passes away who's vested in TMRS, his beneficiary or her beneficiary still has the option to retire that account. If it's one person, if it's a spouse, or even a non-spouse, that person has the option to still draw a lifetime retirement benefit that would include the matching dollars along with the employee's contribution. So that is something that would...
So it's only once it's amortized that changes. Once they've retired and they've defined an annual benefit.
That's correct. And I missed that part.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, that's several questions. That's okay.
Sorry, excuse me. When employees retire, TMRS actually offers multiple ways that the annuity can be paid out. One is a lump sum, partial lump sum within annuity. The other one is a sole individual that would receive it for his life and then stop. There's one for himself and the beneficiary, and you can even go so far as himself and a number of dependents. So you can, I know one of our employees is looking at providing a lifetime benefit for his kids through TMRS that would continue on, and that each time you add more people, his retirement payout keeps decreasing because it's an annuity and it has to keep going, but the employee has full control over how that's paid out at his time of retirement.
All right, great. And thank you for your indulgence. I only have 2 more questions. I promise I'll be done soon. So as I look at these projections and I look at that unfunded liability is why I asked for this, because it is frightening to see a negative unfunded liability that's equal to 50% of our general fund. And you've answered many of those concerns, but I know that these are based on projections. So what happens as life expectancy increases, or what happens to the city's pension liability in the event of a multi-year recession that resulted in near zero or worse returns?
We've actually had a couple years in the last decade where we have seen negative return. In 2008, we finished with minus 1.32%, but we were still at the top of the heap that year because most pension plans lost between a quarter and a third of their portfolio in 2008. We sat in a fortuitous position that year. I mentioned to you earlier that we were still invested in government and corporate bonds. So we finished in the top 1 percentile that year. And then we've also had a year, it wasn't a negative return, but it was 0.02% return. One of the things that TMRS does, and pension plans, most pension plans do it, to make sure that we stabilize the volatility that we expect to happen in the market. We anticipate volatility. The market is a volatile instrument. We know that. So what we do is we smooth those years where we exceed the assumed rate of return, and we also smooth those years, we defer the losses in the years where we don't meet the assumed rate of return over a 10-year period. And what we end up with is more often than not is we defer gains for those years where we won't meet the assumed rate of return. That's built in to help to mitigate the volatility that we anticipate, we count on in the market. The other part of your question had to do with a multi-year recession. Multi-year recession, if it affects the city's the revenue, the tax revenue that you're receiving, then of course every city still has in its toolkit, as I told you, not just today, but in the future. Every city still decides in TMRS what among these options makes sense for this city.
Great, thank you very much.
Very good. Mr. Edwards?
I just have a couple of questions. You said that you'd use corporate bonds and government bonds, right?
We did back in 2008. We have since diversified substantially from where we were in 2008.
Okay, so the Federal Reserve electronic database says that the average interest rate since 1928 has actually been about 5.18, and you guys are using 6.75. Have you adjusted down for that?
Well, we have not, because, as I said, back in 2008 is when we began to diversify the portfolio, and it looks very different than it did in 2008. Before,
You sold at the market low.
well, we didn't sell, but you're right in that had we stayed in that position, that, as I said in my presentation, would ultimately end up pressing, and it would have upward pressure on our city's rates, because we knew we would not get the return on those bonds long term to continue to pay the interest credits to our members and to our cities. We knew that we had to diversify, and that's when we began to move dollars in a dollar cost averaging approach into the equities markets.
Okay, so second question to follow up with that. Are there any investments inside that portfolio right now that are CMOs or any kind of mortgage bonds, mortgage-backed securities at this time?
We do have a real estate sliver inside the portfolio, and I believe that that is less than 5%. I can confirm what the percentage is. Our funding, our investment policy, it's all out on our website, transparent for you to see. I will look it up when I get back, and I'll send word back to your finance director.
That's great. Can you go back to one slide for me? There was a slide that showed 56,500 and 107,000 active members. So basically 52.8% of the members are actually drawing.
No. When we look historically, TMRS has been around since 1948.
Okay.
And as of today, when we look at all the people who've ever retired from TMRS and are still living, either they're living or their survivor is living and drawing an annuity from TMRS, we've got 56,500 who are drawing a benefit. We have 107,000 active employees today. When we look at all 875 cities, 107,000 active employees are contributing to TMRS.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And I'm actually glad to see that you went to an equity-based portfolio. Smart move.
I would like to point out on the finance page, we were awarded the Pension Star for transparency. On there, one of the requirements is the investment return for the pension plan at multiple stages, either I think it's 1, 5, and 10 years, and you can see the average return of TMRS over a 10-year window, their average return. Also point out, it's in the memo as well, the past a couple of years, TMRS has actually extended the average age life, and it did affect the liability. It grew it slightly, and then recently they decreased the expected rate of return from 7% to 6.75. So they did see that the average was trending a little bit lower, and they made an adjustment to the actuarial tables for that. And that's a pretty big shift. It only sounds like 0.25 in the memo and in the TMRS, or sorry, in the city's CAFR, you can see a sensitivity analysis of what just 1% swing on average would do to our liability. If we did 1% better, we'd be like $5 million unfunded liability, whereas if we did 1% worse than the 6.25, the unfunded liability would be $22 million. And that is all on our CAFR and on the website.
Good. Anyone else? Is there a is there a documented ratio, or does it, or rather, is it fair to say that? Let me start again. Does the growth of a city's employee base vary directly or inversely with our unfunded liability, or are there other factors that play into that? Because you said earlier that cities that have become landlocked and basically have a stable employee base may find themselves with more retirees than contributors. And if I think into the future, we're not at build out yet, but someday that's going to happen. Where is that tipping point? What's happening there?
Okay, when we changed the actuarial funding methodology, we used to use the traditional unit credit method, and that did not take into account the future liabilities, and it did not advance fund the current employees' total benefits package. When we changed to the projected unit credit method, and now we're at the entry age normal method, those methods do advance fund those benefits. So even if that ratio starts to shrink now, those liabilities have been tracked all along the way. It's been tracked all along the way, and the city is still on pace to be fully funded within that 25-year schedule.
Okay.
Employee growth is a factor of the annual contribution rate that they have. As you mentioned before, if you have two employees that start the city at the same time, the city's paying in, the employee's paying in, you could almost say that individual employee, say there's a max benefit city, would never have an unfunded liability for that person. It's pay as you go, basically. We're putting in exactly how much we need to. He's putting in exactly how much he needs to, and when he's ready to retire, all the money will be there. A lot of the unfunded liability comes from having past service credits when we make a change to our plan, and we have basically award some past employees for having a 2-to-1 ratio when they may have only been paying in 1-to-1 at the time. We made that decision back when we increased our benefit levels.
Yeah, when I was first on city council, we made a change. We went to a full 2-to-1, and before that it was a lesser amount, so that had an effect on our unfunded liability. That's what you're saying.
I believe we started off in 1993 with an unfunded liability when we gave some prior service credits when we first entered the fund. I do not believe we had much of a retirement plan at the time. So the city's been paying off all of that. And if he makes any substantial changes to the actuarial tables, that could grow the liability faster than what the money we've already put in as and create an unfunded liability. But as we've seen recently, when the last two times they've adjusted, that has been a minor couple of percentage points changed on the funding ratio. And on average, since 2007, the city's, in 9 years since then, we've grown our funded ratio from 47% to the 73%. We grew 25% just paying in that ratio. So in another 9 years, if that trend keeps up, adding 3% a year, any changes they make will level us off, and we'll be there.
Okay. Very good. Anyone else? All good. Listen, thank you for joining us this evening. Appreciate your time. It's an important thing for us to keep our eyes on. And Mr. Walters, I appreciate the work. Good stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate it. All right, the next item that we have on the agenda this evening, we have a discussion regarding an update to the Schertz Master Thoroughfare Plan. Easy for me to say. Ms. Woodley, good evening. Once again.
Good evening again. So I'm here to talk to you all this evening about our proposed Master Thoroughfare Plan update. And I'm going to give a little bit of a refresher. Many of you were not on council when this whole process began several years ago. It's taken us a long time to get where we are. And we did also talk about it at the orientation session that we had earlier. But again, let's just sort of refresh and see where we are. We did have a public hearing at Planning and Zoning Commission a few weeks ago, and you'll have a public hearing about this topic in a few weeks. So we wanted to make sure that you're up to speed on it and explain the report that's in your packet and let you ask any questions. So again, on the background, in fiscal year 13-14, we determined that it was desired to institute a roadway impact fee, which is a way of generating funds to have development pay their fair share, an appropriate amount for roadway capacity increases and new roads. In order to do that, we realized that our thoroughfare plan really needed a significant update. And because those two projects have some overlapping elements, we created one project. Now tonight we're just going to talk about the Master Thoroughfare Plan. It's the first step toward the ultimate goal also of the impact fee ordinance, but we're only going to focus on the Thoroughfare Plan itself. So who's involved? Staff, many departments: engineering, planning, public works, administration. We have a consultant, Freese and Nichols, to do a lot of the heavy lifting and run models and population projections, that sort of thing. We have a steering committee that was made up of many, many folks: planning and zoning commissioners, economic development board, transportation safety advisory commission. And we've done some public input. We had an open house, albeit it was a year ago, but we're still talking about the same things. We've had several public meetings, generally at the Planning and Zoning Commission regular meetings, where we have had some workshops with the steering committee, and a number of public hearings. City Council, of course, you guys are the ones who are going to have to adopt the plan, so you are certainly huge stakeholders. So back to Thoroughfare Planning 101. The Thoroughfare Plan itself provides a framework for the orderly development of an adequate major street system as land development occurs and traffic increases. So we ask questions like, are the roads that we have now sized properly? Do we have enough lanes? Do we have enough turning mobility? What new roads do we need as the city grows, so we don't just get pods of neighborhoods with no way to get from one to another? It also enables coordination with outside agencies to make sure that our proposed thoroughfares line up with Cibolo's proposed thoroughfares, and we don't end up with roads that stop at the city limits. And it reduces overall travel and transportation costs through proper planning. So looking back in history, in 1972, the Schertz comprehensive plan didn't really say a whole lot about the thoroughfare needs. I think it was anticipated that Schertz was generally a bedroom community and maybe wasn't growing that much, and so you can see that even Schertz Parkway was not anticipated. Here's 1518. Here's 3009, which is labeled New Live Oak Road. And then over here's 1103. But in the middle here, nothing in the way of really thoroughfares to provide connectivity within the city. The last master thoroughfare plan that was complete and included travel forecast modeling, look at the functional classifications, access management, the whole 9 yards, was done in 2002, quite a long time ago. Our population then was about 23,000 people. In 2013, the sector plan adopted an update of the thoroughfare plan when our population was around 36,000, but it did not include the actual travel forecast modeling and looking at it from a transportation perspective. It looked at things more from just land use and how that affected the 2002 plan. So here's an image of the 2002 master thoroughfare plan. And then this one, it's kind of much harder to read, but this is our current master thoroughfare plan, which is essentially the 2002 plan with some changes in alignment and a few things added or removed based on the sector plan. So it is important to realize that we do have a master thoroughfare plan that does have roadways on it and alignments that are not currently constructed, and we're looking to amend it, not to develop a totally new plan out of the blue. The tasks in generating a thoroughfare plan are to identify the issues and develop policies. These are looking at things like level of service. Would the city be happy with, are we happy now with traffic that moves at a crawl on 78 at rush hour, taking 25 minutes to get from Schertz Parkway to 1103? Or do we want roads that continue to move traffic efficiently? What character of roads are we looking for? Are we looking for roads like Schertz Parkway with landscape medians? Are we looking for narrow roads as much as possible to minimize pavement? Or what character are we looking for in the city? We coordinate with other agencies, analyze the existing thoroughfare system, and that's where Our consultant did, I think, traffic counts in 30-some locations, mapping. They looked at planned developments and how all of that impacts the existing system that we've got and what levels of service we're operating at currently. And then projecting future land use growth scenarios for the 10 and 20-year periods, and that includes travel forecasting and how would our roads, our existing roads, function under those scenarios, and then developing the thoroughfare plan to be able to look at how the future thoroughfares would function under the different growth scenarios. Then there are planned strategies and CIP programming, that's programming of the roadways that are identified for new roadways that are identified in the plan, and plan adoption and documentation. So again, to remind everyone, we coordinated with all of our adjacent communities, our 3 counties, the Alamo area MPO, which maintains statistics and growth projections and whatnot for the entire region, and TxDOT. So during the development of the plan, we identified deficiencies and needs, identified improvements that could be done for short and long term, looked at some non-motorized mobility planning, so that includes pedestrian access, bicycle travel, possible mass transit, including light rail, and we evaluated functional classifications and looked at access management based on different functional classifications. So all that is put together, and this is our currently proposed master thoroughfare plan for 2017. I want to make sure that I point out that what we'll be recommending that you adopt is not just this map. The map is the easy thing that everyone sees, and you can look at it quickly and get some ideas. But there's a whole document, a 60-some page document that was included in your packet that includes a lot of the policies that we've talked about. It includes pictures of cross-sections for the different functional classifications. It includes strategies for access management. For example, driveway spacing on the different classifications of roadways. So there's a lot more to it than just the map. It also includes the methodology behind why different roads are aligned where they're aligned. So I mentioned about the classifications. This is, particularly important to the engineering department. Currently, we've got a thoroughfare plan that identifies roadway classifications based strictly on their right-of-way width. So there's an 86-foot right-of-way classification, there's a 60-foot right-of-way classification, but it doesn't really give a really very good feeling for what those different classifications mean. So we've got construction standards that look at the different right-of-way widths, but again, don't necessarily talk about what type of a road and the purpose of that classification. So we're going to standardize our classifications between the Unified Development Code, our design guide manual, including our standard details, and the thoroughfare plan, so that when we talk about a secondary arterial, everyone knows that that is a standard 90-foot right-of-way, and they'll know, and we'll go through the pictures of the different sections, they'll know generally what it is to look like.
I'm sorry, real quick. To be clear, those widths are typically mid-block right-of-way widths.
Yes.
And so when we get to intersections, based on what's meeting each other, those would flare out to accommodate the right turn lanes and the left turn lanes that we've talked about in the past. As I looked at Councilman Edwards, who's talked to me about that in the past.
Thank you. And there's a section in the plan document that describes those sorts of intersection treatments. So just running through quickly the different classifications. The principal arterial, and I'm not going to address the freeways, the I-10 and I-35. Those are somewhat out of our control from a planning perspective, although we do work closely with TxDOT when talking about improvements on those roads. But we're really focusing principal arterials and down in classification. So the principal arterials We have some examples here like 3009, 78, 1518. And these are generally the somewhat higher speed roads, not freeway speed, but higher speed. They carry high volumes of traffic. Access is carefully managed. You can't put quite as many driveways on these kinds of roads as on some others. They're generally a curb and gutter, urban type section as opposed to having open channel drainage on each side. And what we did hear from public feedback was that when we have these higher speed, larger facilities, it's much preferred, although not by everyone. We did hear some different perspectives, but the vast majority of folks communicated that they prefer shared use pathways that are separated from the travel lanes for these for principal arterials. Next would be a secondary arterial. These are such as part of Lower Seguin Road on the east of 1518, the east-west portion of Trainer Hale Road. And so it's basically a narrower section, generally to accommodate slightly less traffic than the principal arterials and slightly lower speeds. A secondary rural arterial is generally the same function, but it is in a more rural area. So here we would look at Lower Seguin Road west of 1518, Ware Seguin west of 1518. It's still in a very rural area, and generally you've got open channel drainage instead of curb and gutter. So residential collectors, now here's where we get down to a travel speed, design speed generally where folks would feel more comfortable with having cyclists on the pavement, but in a designated lane, as opposed to sharing the travel path with the carway. And in this case, when we have bike lanes on the street, there would be narrower pedestrian sidewalks on each side of the road. Examples of these, a lot of them are already developed. Country Club Boulevard, Woodland Oaks, Savannah, those types of roads. And although those are already developed roads, they may not necessarily be developed at their full width, or they may be constructed but not striped in this way that we really see to be the appropriate function for a residential collector. Commercial collectors, similar to residential collectors, same sort of function but in a more commercial area. So they collect and distribute the traffic from one subdivision to another, and they generally connect the arterials and the residential collectors as well. So we've got two different varieties of commercial collectors. We have provided a section that we don't really have here in Schertz now, but we can see in the future as certain areas develop, particularly the possible transit-oriented development area north of 35 might develop with a more urban section where you would have your storefront and then a very wide area of flat work straight to the road. And that would provide also for on-street parking. So next, I'm going to go through, and I've got it broken up as to northern Schertz, central Schertz, and southern Schertz, highlighting the changes from our currently adopted plan to the proposed new plan. So in northern Schertz, there's not a whole lot of change up here. There was one road that was removed. I think it has something to do with the lack of any proposed development north of Schertz, so there would not be anything to connect to. The New Braunfels thoroughfare plan envisions Schwab Road to ultimately connect to 46, and they've got that on their thoroughfare plan at a 200-foot right-of-way section. So we have increased Schwab Road on this plan to a principal arterial section so that we have the opportunity to match up with that if and when the time comes. There are also a few new thoroughfares on here. There's Homestead Parkway, which is partially built right now, and a new east-west connector. And this is to, because we foresee all the additional residential primarily residential development in this part of town. So those are the highlights of the changes in northern Schertz. Central Schertz, there's really not a whole lot proposed to be changed. Again, most of these roads are in place. One thing that I'll just point out that the Live Oak extension here is actually under construction. A short section of it is under construction now. This plan still allows us to capture this additional right-of-way as development occurs further down along Dietz Creek in this area. So there's not a whole lot proposed to be changed in Central Schertz. Southern Schertz, we do have a considerable amount of change. And the biggest thing I'll point out is that there are numerous roadways west of 1518 that have been removed from the plan. And a lot of that is due to the forthcoming modifications to the land use plan based on the JLUS study. Now, I realize that hasn't been fully approved, and the densities may not be quite as low as what are being requested by the Air Force, but they certainly will be lower than what they have been in the past. So we've found that there will not, at this point, be a need for quite as many thoroughfares in this section of Schertz. On the east side, however, we're still recommending that the extension of 3009 be maintained as part of the thoroughfare plan. And we also have a couple additional thoroughfares here, a backage road to most likely serve commercial development that would be expected along I-10, and another residential and commercial collector sort of bisecting this area of southern Schertz. I wanted to point out a couple points because we did hear from a number of folks at the public hearing with planning and zoning. We heard from lots of folks who are concerned. Well, they've got a number of concerns, but one in particular is the 3009 extension, and that has been somewhat controversial in the past. We're certainly not recommending that it be constructed right now. That's really not what the thoroughfare plan is about. But what we are saying is that that connection is really necessary, and we need to make some sort of provision for it for when the time comes that it is necessary. We ran some calculations. Our consultant ran some calculations and determined that currently the trip from this pathway here is from Elbell Road at 3009 down to a point here around Trainer Hale Road. I'm sorry, that's around Rhine Valley. Thank you. Currently runs between 11 minutes and 18 minutes, depending if it's rush hour or not. And, quite a bit of it is on 78 and then on 1518. Based on 2040 population projections and travel projections, without an additional north-south connection here, that same trip will take about 40 minutes. At the same time, they estimate that about 8,000 trips wouldn't be able to be made at all. People would just bail out. They wouldn't even try because they can't get to where they're going to. The traffic is too backed up. And also, I'll point out that that does not include delay due to trains, which are expected to increase. So this isn't just a connection across 78. It's a connection that would bypass the train on 78 or along 78. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that the thoroughfare plan, again, I just want to reiterate that this isn't laying out places that the city will go out and build roads. But these are alignments that we're looking to reserve for the future road as it becomes necessary. So we're not building a road to bring development in. Development will come, and if we don't have a plan to take care of the travel generated by that development, then we're out of luck. If we don't reserve the right-of-way as the development comes in, we'll have a strip of land where we need to build a road that's fully developed with homes and businesses and whatnot. Also, another thing to point out is that the alignments shown on here are not pinpointed down exactly where they are. They're drawn with some respect to physical conditions, floodplains, that sort of thing. As much as possible, they follow property lines, but they certainly flex one way or another. And they will be set as development comes in. So the first development that comes in that has a thoroughfare shown through the middle of it, they'll have the opportunity to set the point where it enters that property, the point where it leaves that property, and then next folks will have to tie into that. So that's kind of the way it works. To let you know the next steps, so Planning and Zoning Commission did recommend approval of the document and the map as proposed at a public hearing held on May 24th. There's a public hearing here in front of this body scheduled for June 27th. Public notice has already been provided in the newspaper. It'll be at the regular city council meeting, and at that time you'll be asked to take action to adopt the thoroughfare plan, and that would amend the city's comprehensive plan, which is a zoning action, which means it's an ordinance. So the following meeting, July 11th, there'll be a second reading, not a public hearing again, but a second reading at which time the ordinance would be adopted. So, questions, and I or Mr. James can.
Very good. Counsel? Mr. Gutierrez?
Could you refer back to slide number 24? I don't see very many residential connections on the southern side. Is that basically with, discussions with developers once they start doing that? Is that why we would see the residential connectors?
You'll do two things with regard to those residential collectors. One is, keep in mind, as Kathy mentioned, we look at our future land use plan, and that becomes the guide. So much of the area down around here is designated for a 5-acre minimum residential lot size. So with a 5-acre minimum, there aren't that many people, and it doesn't thus warrant those residential collectors. Okay. But as folks come in, we will look to that going forward, which is why we have them in other places going forward. So again, when those developments come in, if they're master planned or whatnot, we look to provide them. But part of what this is based on is also where we think we would need them based on the future land use plan. So what you don't see here is how the land's anticipated to develop. That plays a role in that.
All right, thank you.
So we can provide that. We'll give a copy of the future land use plan in your packet when it comes forward, and that way you can kind of compare it a little bit.
All right. Anyone else down this end? Anyone else down here? All right, very good. Ms. Woodley, James, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, next item that we have on the agenda this evening is a workshop regarding the Schertz Facilities Master Plan. I guess, Mr. James, you have this one as well. I don't know, you've introduced a couple here.
I introduced them, but fortunately for you in the audience, I didn't talk a whole lot. But this one I will. We had a request to provide an update on the facilities master plan. And I will point out that we started that a couple of years ago, really. Back in early 2015, we kind of brought in the consultant, Wigington, Hooker, Jeffrey, PC Architects, to sit down with us and do a couple things. And those who've been on council longer may remember we brought them in not only for the facilities master plan, but the fire station location study as well. So there were a couple of elements to that. And that fire station study is what helped us pin down the location that council approved for purchase a few weeks ago. But the other element was really to do a facilities master plan, and this is something that the city has not done in the past. We've grown our facilities, obviously, and it's been based on often need, but we didn't necessarily have a good idea of where we wanted to end up, nor did we necessarily sort of always take into account how we grew at each step might affect where we ended up as a city going forward. And so that was a bit of what we wanted to have a better feel for here. And so there were a number of elements to what the study would do. Part of it was a big research element, to sit down and talk to staff, look at what our needs are today, look at what our facilities are today, understand how those facilities work well or don't work well. Many of you on council have been by and visited with department heads, and you've seen some that have a little bit more elbow room. You've seen some that are fairly tight with, yeah, so-and-so, they work out of a closet, for example. There's a copier in their office that the department uses. So we've got a bit of that. So part of that was that research. Part of it was an audit to really kind of go through and map out how many square feet we actually had, and not only to look at office space, but look at those communal areas as well. How much is allocated toward restrooms, hallways, waiting rooms, foyers, conference rooms, things like that. A big element was to compare to other cities where we'd kind of talk and go, well, what does New Braunfels look like? Or what does Live Oak look like? Or what does different cities look like, to understand how much room they have, what functions they offer as well. Again, one of the things we look at is if you compare our park system to a New Braunfels that has a river and parks department that has to manage a bunch of tubers, we're very different from them. We'll never have that same level, and so that's a factor that goes into it. They came back with kind of a preliminary space needs report that sort of said, here's where you are today, and this is kind of where you need to be immediately to function okay. Going forward. And as staff, we sort of described it, and now I will see if I can remember the term, it's sort of the innate human dignity, that again, you didn't have somebody in space that you felt embarrassed and felt bad that they were in. May not have been ideal, but it wasn't one that we kind of cringed going, we got to really fix that situation. And we've probably all worked in places like that in the past in our careers where we've had that. The other is certainly we had space that it affected our productivity. The fact that we lacked certain room to do things or spread out plans, for example, has an impact, so we wanted to look at that. They obviously did interviews with department heads to understand what was going on. They toured those facilities to look at the space and see how it operated. And then they tried to identify some priorities. What are the first things we need to do going forward? And then help kind of get to that facilities master plan of what do we ultimately need to do. And so with that, I'll touch on a few things. Given that this was the first one we had conducted, it was really important for us to allow our consultant to kind of do their deal, if you will. And that may be a slightly different thing than, for example, we did with the thoroughfare plan that Kathy talked about. We've updated the thoroughfare in the past. We've gone through that process. Staff has been at cities that those things have occurred, and we have a pretty good understanding of what our community's desire are. So, for instance, when they say, well, you really don't need that landscape median in the middle to really move traffic more efficiently, we would say, yeah, we know that, but our community wants it. They talk a lot about Schertz Parkway and the look and feel of that, and so that's something we need to try to work in and incorporate. With this, we kind of did a bit more hands-off and said, we'll not kind of act on our preconceived notions or knee-jerk reactions. You guys come back, show us what you think you need, and then as we work forward going forward, we'll kind of work it that way. But what we didn't want to do is necessarily skew the outcomes and do things, for instance, of saying, well, we'll never need that much space. We may think we're not, but if the consultant says that, we're going to put it on paper, we're going to have it, and then as we update this going forward, we'll be able to make those adjustments. A couple of key questions we did want to answer. A big deal was, is the Howell Baldwin complex large enough to accommodate future city office needs? So if we wanted to keep all the people that are here today, all those departments, could we fit it in this piece of land? Obviously not taking over baseball fields or things like that. The other part of that is, what are the pros and cons of having one large building versus multiple smaller buildings? We have that smaller building model right now. As you guys know, we have a separate council chambers that sits here. One of the things that prompted a lot of discussion that we want to look into is, this building is used for city council meetings 3 or 4 times a month. It's used for planning and zoning commission meetings twice a month. It's used for Board of Adjustment maybe every other month when they have it. It's used for CCAB in the workroom because we don't use Bob Andrews, but we could certainly move that. Maybe we'll have another function here every month. So we use this facility maybe 8 to 10 times a month, and it sits by itself. We have a separate courtroom that in some ways is fairly similar that we use once or twice a month. And again, there's some pros and cons to those. One of the things we noted here is we have fixed seating, obviously. We can't move it. So for instance, we don't have the same flexibility that New Braunfels has with their council chambers, where they can say, we can move the chairs out, we can readjust them, we can get more flexibility. So part of what we learned going into this, and where we talked about some of the pros and cons, were how we had that space. So could we utilize space for multiple purposes going forward? And part of that goes into, do we have one larger building, multiple smaller buildings? And I'll get into a bit. Part of it has to do with departmental adjacencies. What departments are located near one another, and to what degree do they have the ability to do that? And as I note, so we looked at department adjacencies where that makes sense. Engineering, for example, does a lot of work with planning. Engineering is located over with Public Works off Commercial Place. So Kathy's here, and I'll look to Kathy and Jimmy. You guys spend a fair amount of time each day driving, correct? So they've got a meeting, it's with planning or it's with fire, they drive over here. If that meeting's running late, they tend to sit and wait. We don't have extra space where they could go into an office with a computer and keep working and being productive. So part of those things play a role in that, and that's where adjacencies make sense. If they're spending most of their time over here, ideally we'd have them located over here. GIS is another department we talk about a lot. They do a lot of support things for different departments, but they would probably say they're used more by the departments who are located nearby than those that aren't. So adjacencies are important, makes sense. Some of the things we learned or reaffirmed, one was knowing how many staff need to be accommodated is key to knowing your future space needs. If you can't tell how many folks you're going to have, and that was part of what went into the study, where we look at numbers of employees, go, okay, good luck, we're never going to hit that, we're never going to need that, or if we need it, we can't really afford it. Part of that's what plays into it as well, is that your staffing clearly affects it. The other part of it is understanding what programs or activities we plan to provide in the future impacts our future space needs. If we take on certain functions, for instance, if we want to do our own television station that some larger cities have where they do programming, there's a public access channel, they create their own programming, you need space to accommodate that. May not be a lot, but that goes into it, that adds up, that's part of it going forward. And then, you know, the order in which we expand will significantly impact our need for future facilities. One thing that often happens is when you want to make an expansion, if you're using existing space, you have to accommodate that existing staff in another location. And the cost associated with accommodating staff plays a role. So for instance, when Alamo Heights built a new city hall and renovated theirs, they housed their building permit staff over off Austin Highway. Again, there was a cost associated with accommodating those people going forward. City of San Antonio recently purchased the entire Frostbank building downtown to accommodate their needs in multiple different buildings going forward. So the order in which you do it plays a role. So let me talk a little bit about what sort of it looked like. Obviously, there was that audit. They looked at existing conditions, went out to all our different buildings and spaces to see what we had there. They reviewed who was in what space. So basically just to make sure we had a good handle on where everybody was, because very often we'll get calls from citizens and occasionally, you know, wander around and go, where are staff located? They went through and they mapped out the space that we have in the various buildings that we've got. You can see obviously the courtroom located in City Hall to the left. You can kind of see council chambers in the top right-hand corner. They mapped all of that out to identify how much space each department had. And then they kind of developed that current state of need. Where are we today and what's the issue? And so one of the things they said is almost every department is lacking space to hire staff to keep up with service needs. It truly is a question as we go through budget and we get departments that propose new staff. One of the questions we have after they walk through, here's why I need them, is we say, where are you going to put them? So for instance, GIS said, yeah, if we got another staff person, another GIS staff person like Bill Gardner, this is what we'd be able to do. And we said, well, where are you going to put them, Tony? They said, we would make room and adjust, and we'd fit into the space, the communal space they share. Again, I think we've got a couple folks in engineering that are doubling up on offices going forward. Now, some of those are overly large, and so it works well. Others, it's not as overly large. But that's an issue that we have to consider is as we add staff, where are we going to put those folks? And often it means making some adjustments. And one of the things is some buildings have reached their logical lifespan and require a major renovation. We have some older buildings, if you've been over to where Parks is, for example, or even Public Works, those are, Sandy's still here, she's listening to me. It's an older building, and it's got some issues, and it's got some stuff that makes working there not as comfortable and not as efficient as we'd like it to be. It's been repurposed a couple of times going forward. The other thing is that current dispersion of departments in multiple buildings create confusion as to where the public needs to go. So if you're getting a public works permit, do you do that at the building inspections counter, or do you do that over at commercial place? Or are you having to run two different places? Staffing issues with multiple lobbies. Each time we have a lobby where the public comes in and wait, you have to have somebody sitting there to greet them and deal with them, and you have to accommodate for when that person needs to take a break, needs to go to lunch, needs to take vacation. So the more lobbies you've got to staff those accordingly or move somebody in who does a different job. And then again, we've got some departments that are spread over multiple buildings in different locations. That creates a bit of an issue. Public Affairs Department is located in a couple of buildings, so again, it means they have to move to another building to communicate. So that was sort of some of their findings of that audit. The next step was really kind of identifying, because we're in older buildings, the space we have is not ideal. And not to pick on any particular department, but I'll look back to Jimmy's brethren. Doug Ledbetter's not here. Doug has a huge office. Yes, it's ginormous. And Doug would be the first to go, yeah, I've got this huge, giant office. We have other folks that are in spaces that are too small or not conducive. So part of what the study did is really to go through and map out who needs to be in a cubicle, who needs to be in office, who needs to be in a bullpen. So for example, our inspectors that are out in the field, they don't necessarily even need their own cubicle in the future because they're in and out of the field. They can work in one big room, and generally, except for the beginning of the day and end of the day, they're not even all there. And even then, they'll go out at different times. They'll come back in at different times. And so they can work in an area because a lot of what they do is in the field, so we don't need to accommodate those space needs. But the idea was to say, what do we want people to be in going forward so we can size offices for that and build off that plan? What that got is sort of determining a department deficit. Where are you today relative to where you should be? And we kind of played at a couple numbers with this. One is this sort of ideal. If we had another big flood come through and wiped all this stuff out and we had to rebuild, what would it look like? Versus what's a combination of ideal versus what kind of works in a given situation. So we may have someone in an office that's 10% too small from the ideal, but it works just fine. They're not complaining about it. They can do what they need to do. It doesn't meet the standard. We've got other people that are, again, in a closet with a copier that we really need to do something about. The other thing they created was a departmental adjacency diagram where they looked at where it makes sense to have a strong adjacency, where you want to try to locate folks together, and where there's some relationship, and frankly then others where, yeah, it doesn't matter if they're located near each other or not. There's no benefit to that whatsoever. And we're going to send this report out to you with all the attachments and whatnot, because one of the things we kind of came to is we'll break this into kind of bite-sized pieces, which I think is where we're headed with this. Part of it is what the study kind of tell us. Part of it, where did we stop this based on some decision points that we want to come back and talk to you about as we move this forward in it. And then the other thing that they did is the consultant developed a series of options for how the current structure on each campus could be utilized. So again, we've got the Hal Baldwin, we've got kind of what we call the public works area off Commercial Place. So one of the ideas is keep and expand Commercial Place, add north and south satellites. You saw Kathy's discussion of the thoroughfare plan. Again, even if we add that 3009 extension that's so needed to avoid that, it's a long way to tell somebody you need to show up at Commercial Place, you need to haul all of the equipment down to Southern Schertz, and you need to bring it back. in a day. And so again, there's some benefits to having those satellite campuses. And again, that would often be for things like public works, parks, so they're not having to haul equipment as far, or they can just have somebody show up at a certain location and start their day there. And then clearly that the space we have out there, the buildings we own, are not big enough to accommodate all of our needs. And so again, they came up with a series of options, and they phased those options. And again, we'll talk more about the specifics of this, but just to give a feel for what the study looked at. So for Public Works, they talked about what do we want to do at first? Who do we want to move out? You know, moving fleet and parks out, general services remains, renovate a large training room area that can be used by different folks. We move out streets out of building 2, keep this in a phased program. And there are a series of these, and certainly part of it is looking at some of the adjacencies that work or don't work. But they've given us these options for a series of phases because we will not end up at the end state where we need to be. And they did that for this campus as well, looking at the facilities. So one of the things that I think prompted this question about this was when we came forward to issue the bonds and we had money for building renovation, the question came up, well, how are you going to use that money? And we said, we don't know yet because we need to answer some questions and we need to come back to council to answer some questions, and we want to build off of this report today. Part of what we'll walk through it the next time we do this discussion with you guys, we'll send out this report, let you guys look at it, see where we stopped it, and then we'll pick it up and answer some of those key questions to allow us to sort of modify it and set that course going forward with the future. So rather than talk on and on, I'll sort of hit some of the questions that you guys have.
All right. Well, Mr. Davis, you asked for this to be on the agenda, I believe, so I'll turn it over to you first, sir.
I've got so many questions, but in the interest of time, the consultant, have they finalized their report?
The report is still in draft form because they were waiting on a series of decision points from us. And so likely what we will do is staff will finalize it based on some of the feedback from council. And again, part of what we are doing is doing some space analysis on a couple of different areas that we want to look at to get to that point. So I would say the consultant is pretty much done, though we sort of stop them in an effort saying there isn't really a point going on till we get to the point we get some direction from council. Sorry for the ambiguity of that.
Well, if you're waiting on direction from council, are we going to get the draft report from the consultant, or is there something that's being generated by the staff that is going to be coming to council? And if so, which of those two documents are we going to get, and when are we going to get them?
Sure. So what we're going to do is we are going to deliver you the draft report this week from the consultant to give it to you to let you to review it. We are then going to come forward with a series of another work session to talk about here's what staff feels like some key decision points are that we need to walk you through to get some feedback. And when I say we're waiting on council, we're really not waiting on council, we're waiting on staff because we haven't come forward with those to you yet. So to be clear, this is a staff delay issue, but we want to come to you, get some direction. We then will modify that document based on that, and then bring you that final version that the consultant's done, modified by staff, setting that course going forward so we can use that bond money.
Thank
you. Mr. Larson?
Has the plan from the consultant or the city looked at or evaluated positions that might be candidates for potential remote work opportunities that could increase capacity?
They did not.
Is that something that the city would consider looking into, or is that where do y'all stand currently on that philosophy?
We don't really do much remote work at all. You know, generally I would say the remote work we do is when you have someone who's out sick or off for some reason, and they will work from home as a result of that. But the reality is, I think our citizens expect us to be here. So the permit counter, they need somebody there for a permit. The inspectors, they need an inspector there. And even the internal support departments, they're relied on by our staff. So if you need an issue with finance, you need finance to be there. So we have not really done much with remote work or working from home, those sort of things at all, and it's not part of our plan going forward.
And And I guess just to clarify, so would it be possible to look into those options for gaining capacity if we're saying we have a capacity issue and we're in an era where technology makes on-demand, real-time, face-to-face meetings available anywhere? Is it something that we could evaluate so that potentially saves? I mean, I know lots of organizations are utilizing remote work, or at least the option of remote work, to significantly reduce real estate costs. I think it'd be something that we should at least look into, maybe for back-end support staff, or have someone evaluate if there's any even positions within the city that would be candidates for such a program.
So what I would say is, if we go do the sort of staff comparison study in terms of staffing levels and the need that was discussed, that would be something I would suggest we would look at with that. I certainly understand if council's direction is that's something to take a look at. Again, not trying to not be open to it. That is something that I'm not sure our organization is close to being ready for, to be able to manage that effectively, to be perfectly honest.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Thompson.
Appreciate the work and the update. One of the things I also appreciate in this is your ability to consider what I would term multi-purpose use of buildings. Moving the courtroom over here, remodeling this room so this square footage becomes used much more extensively during the average work week and evenings. The domino effect that creates in the next building, I think those are things where we can certainly start and get a good advantage for minimal cost at this point.
Dr. Kaiser?
Just a quick question. How much leeway have you given the consultant in determining, for example, office space needed? So did you say, okay, in this position, we want an office this large? Or, are you leaving it up to them to determine, the needs and the space requirements?
With regard to the office space size or the cubicle space size, I will say that was one area the consultant sort of relied on the city to make a determination. They basically said, look, different cities do different things. Here's some of the factors you want to consider with workload. But that was one area that they showed a lot of deference to executive directors, working with department heads, working with staff to come up with it, and then we tried to reconcile that across the organization. So the consultant did give us feedback on what we'd say, saying that may seem small, or if they do this function, you may consider a little bit more. But generally, that was one of the areas that they showed more deference to the city in terms of it's just a judgment call how big you want those spaces to be.
So are you going to send us both, what staff recommended and what the consultants recommended?
So with regard to that, what I'll send you is what the consultant has in the draft report. So again, there's not necessarily at this point a separate recommendations with it. I'll say the areas where we maybe sort of looked at it and said that doesn't seem right had to do with the number of staff we would have that they make some assumptions based on, and the actual amount of space in some of those areas seemed larger to us. But we'll give you what the consultant came up with, and when we come back, we'll kind of identify those things that don't seem as good a fits. But again, generally the feeling is they're proposing more space and more people than we think it's likely we'll have. But the office space size, there's just one recommendation. We don't necessarily disagree, or they disagree with us on that.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Mr. Edwards.
So, Brian, you said that you didn't foresee the organization being able to handle a remote access type of situation, not even like 311, some of those services that are used on a daily basis, but typically phone and reception. No?
So with regard to, say, 311 and whatnot, no, I think those are functions that we likely will continue to have here. And I took the question as being allow folks to work from home was what I understood. And no, that's not something, and again, I'll be real blunt, organizationally that we are quite ready for. That managing someone who is working from home to ensure you get productivity requires some different skill sets. There are often some issues associated with how we do computers and things like that. What we tend to find is we need our folks here. Part of that is they do double duty. So the folks who do 311, they don't just sit and wait for the call come in. They're multitasking as they go forward. They're dealing with people walking in and greeting. So again, we have had conversations about some of those benefits. Again, organizationally, that I think at this point is more than we can accommodate. That's not to say that 10 years down the road we won't be in a different place going forward, but a lot of our functions, we frankly just kind of need our people here because they multitask, they wear multiple hats, and we need them to be available to do different things and step in as needed.
Very good. Anyone else? All right. If not, thank you, Mr. James. Appreciate it. Next item that we have on the agenda this evening is one that I asked to have put on. I shared with the council a couple of three memos, if you will, just about anticipating how things that might occur would be dealt with from the chair as procedural matters. And I just want to have this on the agenda in case there are any questions about those, or if you wanted to delve into them at all. If there aren't any questions, then it's good, but I just want to make sure that we had an opportunity to talk about them, and if necessary, look at making changes to our rules to accommodate any other unforeseen challenges that we might have. So, Mr. Crawford.
Would that include changing the mayor pro temp process?
The rules belong to the council as a body, so anything and everything that we might want to look at.
I'll ask the question to council then. Would it be possible to consider going back to our 6-month rotation to give the 5 new people a chance, along with the experience of the 2 and the mayor, as more senior people have, to make sure we did everything okay?
Council, thoughts on the process? I mean, we are posted for a discussion regarding our rules of conduct and procedure, and the method by which we select a mayor pro tem is part of that body of work. So it is, you can discuss it now if you wish.
I mean, I really don't have a problem with it if we all agree as a body to do it. I have a problem.
That's my question. I'd like some input from other council members. I'm not saying it has to be done, by God, do this now, but I'm saying that we have 5 new members and we have 3 very senior, 2 very experienced, and 1 other gentleman that's pretty experienced. So, and there's no reason, in my view, that's my personal view, that we couldn't go back like we were and have everybody have a chance to hold that function. It's not. I don't think that Mr. Edwards would fail to help me if I were sitting in your chair, Mayor. I don't think Mr. Kessel would either.
I leave it to the council. It's really,
that's the question.
It's y'all's decision. Okay. Anything else? I don't think that we'll have an occasion to bring up one of the things I wrote where Mr. Thompson and Mr. Edwards and I will not be here, but should it occur, it was an interesting thought process to say, well, how would that get resolved by the quorum that would remain? That was one of the things that we talked about. All right. Well, if there aren't any questions, let's move on because it is getting a little later. And listen, if we do want to talk about anything with regard to our rules of conduct and procedure, that body of work is not at all set in stone. It is meant to be a living, moving body of work that responds to the dynamics of the council. So at any time that we want to talk about those things, we should get that on the agenda and do so. All right, the next thing that we have on the agenda tonight is the consent agenda items. Item number 1, the minutes, and it's the approval of the regular meeting minutes of May 23rd, 2017, and minutes of the special meeting of May 24th, 2017. Ordinance 17T18, an ordinance by the City Council of the City of Schertz, Texas, authorizing a budget amendment to fund the 42nd Annual 4th of July Jubilee event, repealing all ordinances or parts of ordinances in conflict with this ordinance and providing an effective date. And item number 3, excused council absences, excused absences of council members Davis and Thompson from the meetings of May 23rd, 2017 and May 24, 2017. Are there any questions or comments or any of these that need to be pulled and considered individually? If not, is there a motion to approve the items on consent?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion we approve the consent agenda as stated.
Second.
I have a motion from Mr. Crawford and a second from Dr. Kaiser. Any other comments or questions from council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes and no nays, so ordered. Item number 4, discussion items, appointments, reappointments, and resignations to the various city boards, commissions, and committees. And I understand the city secretary will make a brief presentation for us regarding the recommendations to those.
Good morning. Good morning. Oh, excuse me. It's good
The
evening.
days tend to run together. Sometimes it feels like
Mayor,
morning when it
Council.
shouldn't.
Mayor, Council, management staff. The interview committee met June the 1st and to consider reappointments, appointments, and resignations. What you have before you is a memo, and I'm going to go through this really quickly. The interview board requests the council approve the resignations of Mr. David Richmond from the Planning and Zoning Commission, Ms. Cynthia Palmer from the Historical Preservation Committee, Mr. Edward Fair from the Parks Recreation Committee, Mr. Ronald Perry from the Transportation Safety Advisory Commission. The interview committee also recommends the following reappointments and appointments for the Board of Adjustments. Reappointment of Frank McElroy, Regina Agee, Danny I can't say her name, Salas. Committee of Committees, reappointments, Richard Jevitz, Shauna Lee Burke, and Tim Brown. For the Economic Development Corporation, the reappointments of Tim Brown, Mark II, and Roy Richards, and the appointment of Victoria Ridenauer. The Historical Preservation Committee, the reappointment of Paul Rickenbach, Dave Lynch, Pete Perez, and the appointment of LaDonna Bacon. The Library Advisory Board reappointments, Juan Thorne, Laura Wilson, Ruth Teener, Patty Dilworth, Margaret Riley, Patty Paulson, and Cindy Vigil. The Parks and Recreation Advisory Board reappointment of Philip Rowland, Regina Agee, and Faye Simmons, and move Jim Fowler as from an alternate position to a regular position. The Planning and Zoning Commission, the reappointment of Christian Gromblick and Richard Brode, and the appointment of Gordon Ray. Transportation Safety Advisory Commission, the reappointments of Stephen Bish, Bill Bowers, Richard Jevitz, John Sullivan, and the appointment of Mark Moody as a regular member. These are the recommendations made by the interview committee that conducted their meeting on June 1st. Request approval as presented.
Chair moves that we approve the resignations, appointments, and reappointments as read. Is there a second? I have a second from Mr. Edwards. Any other comments or questions from council?
I have a quick
Yes, ma'am.
question. Would it be possible, I know some of us sit on the interview board, would it be possible for us, everyone, to get a copy of the application and letter that each person submits to sit on the boards?
Do you want all their reappointment letters and all of
Just
those?
their email.
Just their email addresses? Yeah. Sure,
No,
absolutely.
no, get them through email. I mean, not a hard copy.
Yes.
Just,
I can do that.
okay, thank you.
Very good. Any other questions, comments from council? If not, I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 7 ayes and no nays, so ordered. Next item that we have on the agenda this evening is a roll call vote confirmation from the city secretary. Oh, I'm sorry. On mine, I've got it marked out because staff asked that this be postponed because the chief is unable to be here. My apologies. I've been thinking about it, so I just immediately went over it. So we're not going to take on number 5 as staff asked that we postpone.
So the roll call vote. Consent agenda items 1 and 3. Motion was made by Councilmember Crawford, seconded by Councilmember Kaiser. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards. Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Item number 4, the resignation, appointments, and reappointments to the city boards, commissions, and committees as presented. Motion was made by Mayor Carpenter, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Edwards. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards. Councilmembers Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. No one voted no. Motion passed.
Very good, thank you. Next item that we have on the agenda tonight, we have a closed session. City Council will meet in closed session under Section 551.074 of the Texas Government Code, personnel matters to deliberate the appointment of a municipal judge. At this time, we will recess our open session, go into executive session, and be out as quickly as we can. All right, we're now back in open session. It's 9:05. Item 6A, take any action based on discussions held in closed session. Under Agenda Item 6, motion is made from the chair that we advertise for the position of municipal judge Monday through Friday of next week or the following week, whichever is convenient for staff, with 2 posting requirements. The applicant must be a member of the State Bar of Texas and must have a minimum of 10 years of experience practicing law.
Mayor Carpenter,
Yes, indeed.
do we need to say where we're going to advertise?
Oh, yes, and we will advertise on the city website and with the Texas Municipal League.
We also said practicing 10 years law in Texas.
It is correct. So we capture all of that. We're going to advertise for a Monday through a Friday, whether it's next Monday through Friday or the following Monday through Friday, on the city website and with the Texas Municipal League. Applicants must be a member of the State Bar of Texas and must have practiced law in the state of Texas continuously for 10 years. Continuously for 10 years. I don't want somebody who was here for 6 months and left and came back and they've been hanging out continuously for 10 years. Yeah, it's a specific connotation. All right, any other? All right, is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Second.
Have a second from Mr. Crawford. Any other comments or questions from council? And I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, so ordered. All right, the next item that we have, roll call vote confirmation. Sorry, getting ahead of myself again.
All right, this is going to be, I hope I got this right. Motion was made by Mayor Carpenter, seconded by Councilmember Crawford, to advertise on the city website and the Texas Municipal League Monday through Friday, 2 posting for municipal judge with 10 years experience in Texas.
Must be a member of the State Bar of Texas.
Must be a member of the State Bar of Texas. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards voted yes. Council members Davis, Gutierrez, Larson, Thompson, Kaiser, Crawford voted yes. Motion passed.
Okay, ma'am. Next item that we have on the agenda this evening, we have announcements by the city manager. Mr. Kessel tells me he has none. Item number 8, placing items on a future agenda. Anything that we don't have scheduled that we need to have scheduled on a future for future meeting? Mr. Crawford?
Could we have a discussion next week about the camera and the closing of the case and all that kind of stuff?
I would object to placing that on council.
With regards to an ongoing investigation, till such time as that is closed, it's not something we should discuss in public, given that it's an HR item. I don't think there's any reason for us to discuss that in public. I think anyone who has concerns with regard to that needs to visit directly with the city manager or the city attorney. You okay with that, Mr. Crawford?
Could you say it one more time, please?
I think that anybody would, on this council, that would like to have an update or discuss something that's going on that is an HR matter.
Is that an HR matter? I don't want to talk about the HR part of that.
Well, given that
I'm not sure. How about if you and I talk and then we can talk about it next week or something?
That'll work.
I mean, I don't want to waste a lot of time here about what's proper and what's not.
Certainly. We can definitely do that. Anyone else? All right. In that case, the next item on the agenda is item number 9, announcements by the mayor and council members. And we'll start with Mayor Pro Tem Edwards.
Nothing, Mr. Mayor.
Very good. Mr. Crawford?
Nothing, sir.
I'm sorry. Mr. Crawford, you say you didn't have anything? Any announcements, commentary?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, very good.
No, sir.
Mr. Gutierrez?
I just want to thank Parks and Recreation for the movie in the park. Attendance has been growing, and the arts and crafts were a big hit. Thanks, Andy. Thanks to you and your crew there.
Very good. Mr. Larson?
Nothing.
Mr. Thompson?
No, sir.
Dr. Kaiser?
Just wanted to say thank you to Mr. Mabbitt. I was able to participate in the emergency response exercise, right, last week. So some of us went out there, and I think the other injured patients were the students that are currently going through a class. But it went really well. Did that over at Peckrell Park. Very impressive by all the people that took part in that. First responders did a great job.
Excellent. The only announcement that I have is that the governor announced today that on July 18th there will be an extra session of the state legislature, and they're taking up all kinds of frisky things that may impact us. So if you have an opportunity to go to Austin on the 30th and hear the legislative wrap-up, kind of be just a little more than a precursor to the special session. That said, anything else from staff or from council? If not, we stand adjourned.
And it's committee meeting time.